My name is Hussein. I'm a principal lecturer for music based at the University of Westminster. My experience covers practice areas including production, performance, songwriting, and composition, music theory, music business, and areas of law such as IP and copyright. My work on artificial intelligence include conference papers, articles, chapters, and presentations. I have also written some fictional short stories on AI, which, whilst these are presented as a future possibility, the truth is that much of this already happens under current production systems. My interest in AI and music also include teaching selected AI music applications, such as Google Magenta Tools and DDSP at undergraduate levels. Here we explore some of the issues and potential use cases for this software. My position with AI, as is clear from some of my articles and presentations, is that AI represents another attempt to reconfigure production conditions. Therefore, AI, before we consider any claim of democracy, efficiency, or productivity brought about by this software, we should also examine this reconfiguration rigorously and critically. For this video, I have divided it into roughly 3 sections. The first is Observing Music and AI Systems. This provides a summary of key points of interest in my research. The second section is a discussion about what music or culture problem does AI seek to solve? Who is or are the beneficiaries? The third section deals with unintended consequences and music. This deals with music made by misusing, in a creative way, equipment and tools. A question that we can ask here is to what degree AI facilitates this, given that this is a human production method. Then I move on to some future thoughts and conclusion. As you have already covered with Peter, Lucy Suchman's AI as floating signifier will be relevant here, and in many ways, I'm afraid my lecture probably does not lead to a conclusive point. We just kind of arrive at a position, a range of understanding. If you have read and listened to any of the initial materials, then you will have heard 3 selected AI projects spanning an 8-year period. Interestingly, the first 2, Daddy's Car and the Amy Winehouse song, are strictly not AI, but are instead a human-machine hybrid. The third example, The Soul of a Machine, released in mid-March 2024, is the work of a machine, apparently with no human intervention other than the prompt. So it is the matter of machines and humans working in music that we will turn to next. Changes in music production brought about by AI are considerable. As general users, AI can suggest tracks via playlists. We might use Shazam to identify a song. As a producer, we might use a similar system to identify similar sounds in a library of sounds that we might be using for our production. All of these examples stem from what are called recommendation systems. These are essentially a database. Most of these uses might appear benign and potentially useful. However, applications I am interested in are tools like Ava, which can be identified as changing production conditions in the following 5 ways. Number 1, breaks the currently known musical interfaces, whether as instrument or computer, and replaces established musical processes and terminology with a new language which lacks correspondence or correlation with musical practices. Whilst the output might be musical, the means of getting there does not use any of the instrumental, gestural, metaphorical, or collaborative means used to make music. Now, whilst this is an extension, this approach can be said to be similar to that of colonialists, such as the conquistadores, who replace musical instruments and the language of indigenous peoples with new instruments and language thereby breaking links with the past, the heritage, and their communities. This process is achieved through the design of interfaces, which Offert and Fan describe as a means of putting words in the user's mouth. Specifically, Ava achieves this through presenting users preset styles. Presets can be thought of as constraining the universe of possibilities to the limited number offered by the developer. If you look on the screen, after all, what does Chinese music mean or signify as a musical output? Does it play into assumptions, into stereotypes? Who decides what is Chinese music? This putting words in the mouth of the user already reduces down the range of possibility within a set of tropes and metaphors that will not expose the limits of the machine and therefore any shortcomings in AI. Selma Brinksjord says that these sorts of approaches relieve programmers of the burden of having to express a problem. In music applications, the solution becomes managed via the choice of interface, which also dictates the type of output. As such, the interface does not resemble a musical instrument. There are no specific musical correlates between the interface use of words like temperature and diversity and how these relate directly to musical outputs or process. After all, these are not musical terms. They are terms devised by the developer. In fact, they are more akin to words found in statistical modeling rather than music. They're also looser and more abstract. They lack the specificity of musical language and, despite any assertion of the potential democracy of removing the burden of musical skill, and these are claims made by companies like Ava, the net result is a type of music that still requires skills of organization. The second point is that Ava also owns the means of production. In keeping with many platform-based technologies, the user is unable to run a localized version of the software on their machine. This lack of being able to run a localized version means that not only can users be monitored, but also that any material products made using the software remain available to the machine and, of course, the company. A dichotomy emerges here with respect to the democratizing aspect of these technologies, coupled with a lack of ownership and centralization. The third point is that Ava manages access via subscriptions. In keeping with developments in platform-based technologies, Ava uses subscriptions as a means of rent-seeking, controlling access to the amount of musical output and how this work can be subsequently monetized. If you've looked at the preparatory materials, then the quote from Jacques Attali shows that the bulk of commodity production then shifts to the production of tools. Ava, therefore, is a production tool, and therefore any commodity that is produced using these tools, i.e. music, will be managed through the tool. And the primary means of doing this is the subscription. So this growth in subscription services, as well as the proliferation of creator tools, demonstrates the value that creators have for platforms, not just as creators, but also as users of products for creative work. As such, the introduction of a new technology becomes not just an entry point for other types of practitioner, but it is also an opportunity to reconfigure relationships between makers and their tools. In Ava's terms, this results in two types of controlling actions. The first is to limit the amount of production that can be exported from the machine per month, determined by subscription level. All users, irrespective of subscription level, are able to make as much as they desire, but are limited with respect to exporting the result. That is, fixing it into a tangible form external to the machine. The second action point is that, depending on subscription level, Ava also owns the musical output. Unless users subscribe at the highest tier, These users will not only have constraints on the amount of music that can be produced, but also that Ava dispossesses these users at lower tiers of the ownership of the work and the potential to derive income from exploiting the intellectual property rights. These conditions can be avoided, but only if one pays at the highest subscription tier. Thus, subscriptions become a form of rent-seeking, and the lack of ability to pay also results in rights dispossession. Subscription levels are also used to determine what the user can do with the music. For example, some tiers only allow the music to be used on social media platforms. And that, as well as using it on social media platforms, credit must also be given to Ava, which also redirects advertising revenue to the company. The ability to upload music created in Ava by a user to a streaming platform, which is another potential source of revenue for music producers, is also restricted by subscription tier. Therefore, these conditions bring into effect forms of rights dispossession, which can also be seen in other AI applications such as Moobed and Soundry. In these systems, irrespective of subscription level, users do not own any of the outputs. Instead, the platform licenses the material back to the user via a sub-licensing agreement. What this also does is to provide the AI company or service access to a ready-made set of materials that it can also deploy to further its own economic function. This shifts the operation of the service from that of facilitating creative work to competing directly with creators, which also has the possibility of competing against them using the creator's own work. The fourth point is that all workers, or users if you prefer the term, irrespective of their subscription tier, will also be providing unpaid labor to the improvement of the machine. As users' work is also ingested by the machine, this means that the machine learns from this unaccounted for labor at all tiers. That is, it doesn't matter what level a producer or user is subscribing to. Producers are also a constant source of training material. The effect of this approach is to make it difficult for any user, especially at the higher subscription tier, to obtain a novel, compositional, or production advantage. Essentially, their labor produces an improvement, a benefit, if you will, for all users, but especially the company. Okay, the last of these 5 points is that these companies also encourage users to divest other rights holders of their intellectual property. And they do this by offering interface options to emulate existing music. Now, what this means is that a user, let's say that a user is creating a piece of music with the AI tool, and they essentially don't really like it, and they'd like to steer the music towards a particular outcome. So the way that this is achieved is by enabling the user to upload either an audio file or a MIDI file. And the MIDI is a musical instrument digital interface. It's a protocol, communication protocol. In Ava, this system is called composing with influence. However, many music AI systems allow users to steer the machine composition towards a particular outcome by uploading a file. In this instance, the file could be the user's own music, or actually one that's already in commercial circulation. If it's in commercial circulation, then it's already copyrighted. Therefore, the system allows the user to circumvent or infringe the copyright of others. In other AI systems like Moobed, they offer a similar service or interface, if you like, which allows the user to enter a YouTube URL. So in this instance, a user doesn't even actually have to even have access to the track. They can just use it if it's on YouTube. So they enter a YouTube URL, and Moobet analyzes and searches for a similar track in its database, or it generates a new one based on what it's essentially ingested from the YouTube link. In this setting, the user is not the owner and doesn't even have a version of the file. But what it does show is how APIs like YouTube can then be incorporated and or exploited into other products, exploits right holders and its content management system. The API also ensures that when used in an AI product, that it actually circumvents this content management system. And therefore, this is how YouTube doesn't really offer much in the way of protection for users when they are being infringed via the API. What these systems also reveal is the lengths to which users, potentially those who want to have good outcomes, will go to produce something good in an AI system. At the more general level, this general ingesting of large amounts of material confirms what Bender and colleagues highlight are largely responsible for the improvements in large language models. These improvements have mainly been due to architectural innovations and through sheer size, rather than due to advances in intelligence or sophistication in programming. This point, which we will see in a short while, also refers back to Selma Bringsjord's identification that developers throw large amounts of data at LLMs, large language models, because these machines will hopefully come up with a solution to the problem that actually the programmers have great difficulty in expressing. And thereby, they have great difficulty designing a mathematical solution or proof for. So that concludes the 5 points. There are quite a few there to hold on to. So taken as a whole, this collection of behaviors exhibited by AI music composition systems leads to a position that I have developed from Harry Braverman, and that is that AI meets the condition of alien power. This is not because of the discourse around AI as a superintelligence taking over the world, but because AI, as a capitalist tool, produces this effect. Interface choices, such as those of Ava or Moobet, demonstrate the power of, as Kaplan and colleagues say, the power of decisions embedded in design that have significant ramifications. This is why AI systems cannot be described as evolutionary, neutral, nor a continuation, without first conceding the conditions of alienation and dispossession that arise from developers' desire to create an AI tool usable by everyone and for the requirement of the AI company to make revenue. Given the conclusion of alien power and the 5 points which contribute to this conclusion, it is perhaps worth considering why music reveals these sorts of issues in ways that graphic programs like DALL-E and Midjourney only partially reveal. For example, irrespective of subscription rate, users of Gen AI for image and text systems own the outputs. There is no limit placed on how much the user generates other than the ability to pay. Users can use the files in any setting and are not restricted from using them on social media, for posters or book jackets. Yet music is subject to conditions that others do not encounter. This feeds into some general observations which I will share with you. In identifying what the music industry is, Patrick Vikstrom holds that it is a copyright industry based on a system of licenses. If we consider the issue between Universal Music Group and TikTok, then we can see that this issue of licensing and commensurate or appropriate remuneration is at the foreground. It is not an opposition to TikTok. It's just that if TikTok wants to use music, they will have to pay for it. In AI companies like Moobet and Ava, and they're encouraging users to steer the composition process by this rights infringement, these types of industry copyright and licensing controls are flouted. However, a system of copyrights and appropriate remuneration. However, we must also understand that a system of copyrights and appropriate remuneration is also a form of rent-seeking, something that composers, publishers, and record labels have been doing for a very long time. When Marx says that iron rusts and wood rots, he is clearly observing that these will need to be replaced, replenished, or will require maintenance at some point, therefore implying a need for a variety of workforces and companies to attend to these matters. Songs on digital servers do not deteriorate. Because cultural goods, as Jones says here, because cultural goods are not used up in consumption. A film is still a film after it has been watched. In many of my music lectures, I like to start with the following quote from a UK government research report undertaken by researchers at the University of Leeds, who were tasked with investigating creator incomes in the age of streaming. There is no evidence that there was ever a time when recorded music was the basis of substantial income for large numbers of musicians, even when total revenues were higher in the 1990s. This is a salient point with regard to AI and what problem it solves. Clearly, there is a difficult problem of remuneration, and one would hope that AI could be used to solve some of this long-standing and tricky problem. Therefore, an essential claim of AI and music is that it will make its users more creative. Yet, this is creative without an attachment to income or revenue. Montreal highlights this as the unchallenged, axiomatic assumption that AI will help musicians make music. This is usually couched as empowering creativity. Creator tools, therefore, are generally an expression of developers' and scientists' values in deciding what these should be. A large part of what passes for music AI or machine learning is generally of canonic music, usually at the push of a button. So those examples of Daddy's Car and the Amy Winehouse song that hopefully you've listened to are examples of a hybrid approach. So it's a mixture of human and machine. Therefore, it cannot be considered as purely just an automatic composition generator. However, the third track, The Soul of a Machine, is an example of automatic composition generation. So that is an ACG. Now, there was a patent that was filed in 2019 on behalf of the company Amper Music, which is owned by Shutterstock, and its claim as enabling, and I quote, anyone without possessing any knowledge of music theory or practice or expertise in music or other creative endeavors to instantly create unique and professional quality music. So what we have here is the assertion that it will be unique and professional. But the problem is, if everyone's using a tool that provides you with unique and professional quality music, how does one make any sort of money? How does one sort of derive any kind of income from any kind of professional output? So the profound issue, aside from directly modeling copyrighted music or musical identities, is the question, what problem does AI music, especially automatic composition generation, seek to solve? Therefore, if one were to consider music as a problem area, what sort of problems should AI solve? Again, if I refer you back to Selma Brinksjord, I mentioned him a little bit earlier, his point is that developers are rarely, if ever, taught in computer science textbooks what creativity is, nor do they undergo training in it or how to code for it. Therefore, any artist seeking to use AI, certainly in terms of creative problem solving, needs a clear understanding of exactly what problem AI is supposed to help solve. Bringsjord's point is that there is a lack of problem definition and solution, which means that responsibility is passed on to the user to decide what is useful or valuable. And Bringsjord refers to this as a dead end, which of course produces the magic. Because these AI outputs are also deemed to be magical. So the sorts of generalized problems that AI can be said to assist with are not just those of complete tracks. There can also be attendant problems such as that of things like human-computer authorship, but also issues around things like creative blocks. Du Sautoy suggests that humans tend to become machine-like due to repetitive behaviors by trying the same things over and over again. Therefore, he views AI as something to push me out of the way I've been thinking and see that my world of possibilities is much richer. However, isn't the me that Du Sautoy refers to a necessary part of creativity? Humans are in the way, and sometimes repetition leads to different outputs. And somehow, when humans deal with this limitation, they are able to produce art. The composer David Cope referred to his AI as something to provoke me into composing. Therefore, despite Cope's extensive composition training, there was still something lacking with respect to his composition or composer style and identity. So the AI assisted him in solving this problem. In observing humans using AI in music-making contexts, the following three observations are critical questions that AI music companies have not currently been able to address. These are observations from Huang and colleagues, and these are that AI was not easily decomposable, not easy to tweak individual musical components, was not context-aware, i.e. not fully aware of the musical context it was generating for, and not easily steerable, not easy to request for the music to bear a certain mood or effect. These three ideas, while they may appear to be the concern of music, are also the concerns of other creative works. If we consider what was discussed earlier about Ava and the other AI applications, these encourage users who encounter these sorts of problems of decomposability, lack of context awareness, lack of steerability, to essentially provide the AI with another track, with something else. And this something else is expected to produce the output, somehow to carry an answer that the AI hasn't quite got. So these three ideas, they may appear to be the concern of music, but they're also the concern of other creative works. There are, of course, some scenarios that we can consider. The first one is the question of decomposability. Not being able to change or refine individual components of a composition is something that producers are able to do. Examples of these can mean sort of changing the sonic properties or exchanging the sound for another, changing the rhythm, changing the notes, changing the articulation of a part. Composition and music production methods include things like making things go backwards, reverse. There can be inversions. We can harmonize and we can reharmonize. These are examples of processes of decomposition, and they might be momentary, i.e. we only want to do it for half a bar. They might be for a section, or they might be for the entire piece. And of course, if we make any of these decomposable kind of changes, we would then have to reevaluate the whole piece once again to determine whether the process is successful and whether any other musical parts will also need to change or require some form of adaptation, or whether we need to add new things to it. So what I'd like to do now is to show you a little selection of some audio files that I have. In the audio example, I've got a MIDI file. So as I told you already, MIDI is a machine communication protocol for digital instruments, electronic musical instruments. And In the first audio example, you'll be able to hear the sound. I will call it a sound. Some of you might see it as musical. Some of you might not. I don't know. This is then followed by another example where I've used the same MIDI part, but changed the instrument. Now, this is a very simple process. This is not a difficult one. Humans can do this, but it's actually really difficult to get the AI to do this. So let's have a listen to those. As can be heard from listening to those two examples, the end result can be very different. So a question that we might ask here is, how would we be able to do this with an AI during any stage of the creation process? I know that I can do it with myself. I know that I can do it with anyone else I'm working with at any time. But I'm unclear how I would do it with an AI. And I'm also unclear how an AI would understand that this is a part of my kind of artistic process, my sort of creative work, that sometimes I look at things and I think, how can I make this sound different? The problem is different means different things to different people. And this is part of the problem with music in some ways, and also with AI, that they have in common, that there's this kind of, you're back to that Lucy Suchman thing of the floating signifier. What does different actually mean? Internally, I kind of know what it is, and I've trained myself over many years to be able to transform things to make differences. But it's unclear to me how a machine, and one that's been built by people who've studied on computer science courses, actually understand what difference actually means. So the second point, which is to do with context awareness, suggests that context is perhaps extremely important in producing a musical work. If put another way, we might ask, what is the impetus or spark to generating the work? What does an interface for context even look like? How would we add information to the system? This contextualization and symbol generation, especially in popular music, perhaps means that AI can only do part of the job. Michael Jones refers to these symbols as part of the production relations of symbolic goods. And Jones also acknowledges that musicians create far more than music. In this sense, they conjure a total text out of all the signifying materials they can generate. Among these also include things like the way they look and behave, to the stories they tell about why they look, behave, and make the music they do. AI lacks this type of context. So even if a human is using the AI to generate music, they will still be required to create this sort of symbolic level. The third point, which is that AI is not easily steerable, is perhaps a point that can be examined more critically. Let us ask the question, what is steerability based upon? If we were to look at a band as a group of musicians who, through a variety of in-place negotiations, are able to represent a song, then the idea of steerability and directionality becomes one of music as collaboration. Within this, Musicians might well edit an arrangement, perhaps identifying a bar or number of bars that require adaptation or fixing. These sorts of communicative acts seem to be difficult for AI to accomplish. As I have mentioned earlier, an interface is designed in such a way that humans will find it difficult to challenge the AI. In other words, challenge the AI to do something different from what it's already doing. And that with particular interface choices, designers have determined the level to which the machine is exposed to outside influence, that is, from humans. And if we consider the earlier example of Ava with their composing with influence, or Mubet's sort of for the user to provide a YouTube URL, we can see that all of these are external aspects that are designed to influence the machine on the inside, but they don't allow us access to the machine directly. It's always indirectly through another facilitator or through another mechanism. There is no direct communication between a human producer and the AI. So arguably, AI interfaces in general, and music interfaces specifically, are a means of controlling the outside, the external, from gaining direct access to the internal workings of the machine. The internal workings can only be accessed under highly regulated and managed situations. And some of these will include things like new training data. Therefore, the interface represents the communication layer presented to the human user. The failure of communication potentially takes place, certainly with regard to what Huang and colleagues have observed with their 3 points, when the human tries to express an idea using non-functional mechanisms, and the AI tries to interpret this information as correct communication to determine a relevant action or set of actions. Therefore, the interface is essentially designed to only allow a specific type of communication to take place. Users will not be able to use non-functional mechanisms to steer the AI. Therefore, a question that we might begin with might be, in what ways does the interface design either resolve or reinforce these observed problems by Huang and her colleagues? Following on from the idea of communication layers, in the next section, we will discuss unintended consequences, which also have a defined functional and highly creative role in musical contexts. Unintended consequences and music. I'm going to be quoting from Langdon Winner here, who refers to unintended consequences as technology is most productive when its ultimate range of results is neither of reason nor controlled. To put it differently, technology always does more than we intend. We know this so well that it has actually become part of our intentions. Positive side effects are in fact a latent expectation or desire implicit in any plan for innovation. Negative side effects, similarly, are experienced as necessary evils that we are obligated to endure. So Winner suggests that within each intention, therefore, contains a concealed unintention, which is just as much a part of our calculations as the immediate end in view. If we reconsider Ava and the idea of composing with influence and the interface, and the fact that anyone uploading music using that interface is by and large participating in rights dispossession. They are infringing someone's copyright somewhere. And even if they use their own music, they are essentially dispossessing themselves. But to get better music from the AI, a user is obligated to endure, whether knowingly or not, this particular type of interface which results in a rights dispossession. So Winner's discussion of unintention is an important point. In his explanation, unintended consequences are expected. They are not an accident. Whilst they cannot be planned for specifically, it is known that they will be revealed as part of what are described as known unknowns. A good example of unintended consequences, what might be characterized as a side benefit, is DeepMind's application WaveNet, which has ably demonstrated its abilities to construct convincing piano music, not just as notes, composition and performance, but also as timbre and ambience. The original purpose of WaveNet was to reproduce voices in many languages as authentically as possible, as part of a real-time audio translation. It was just a matter of fact that the programmers also turned their program around to see if it could generate something else, and therefore they discovered it could do music. The way that WaveNet's process works is to slice 1 second of audio into 16,000 partials of fragments, and then to reorder these in such a way that the joins are seamless. Human hearing cannot detect these microscopic differences, and therefore we won't necessarily be able to hear them if they are used for copyright infringement. So in this sense, WaveNet's original purpose was as a translator for text-to-speech, and then they discover their unintention, which is that it can also do music, and it does it really well. A question this section also considers is the role of unintended consequences in creative practice. As much as we might refer to unintended consequences of software, we must also see that, as Thieberge highlights, that the misuse of equipment is often in ways unintended by those who manufacture it. And that this misuse of equipment is sometimes instrumental in defining a particular sound. So in popular music, in its broadest sense, popular music is entangled with these sorts of practices. For example, DJ Kool Herc, who pioneered a groundbreaking twin decks approach, is an example of a potential application not in the manufacturer's original formulation. Yet the emergence of this use case is a human invention and innovation with really just everyday materials, a set of turntables. And this innovation initiates ideas of club culture, DJ culture, the breakbeat and rap onto other developments such as house music. In this version of history, the developments are all derived from human activities. Sometimes these are accidental, though they're always experimental. There's always an experimentation with material. However, this experimentation can be both playful and also rigorous in the scientific sense. So a question that we might ask ourselves is, to what degree will AI reveal a hitherto undiscovered application of an everyday music technology, which, or that, leads to an innovative approach similar to that undertaken by DJ Kool Herc? Philip Agre says that AI has never had much of a reflexive, critical practice any more than any other technical field. Therefore, claims that AI provides solutions to persistent problems in the creative field, which also require reflexivity and criticality, remain merely just that, claims. When an AI expresses an emotion within the context of a black musical practice located in a time of Jim Crow, amidst racial segregation, precarity, and lynchings, much like the soul of a machine does, what is the signal being sent? George Lipsitz warns against a kind of romanticization that looks so hard for individuality, emotion, and an aesthetic rendering of social pain that it obscures the collective, material, and political dimensions of social life. It could be argued that the track, The Soul of a Machine, operates in exactly this way. The AI that produced this type of music is divorced from its context and the historical basis that led to the creation of this type of music. The AI, or in truth the AI company, turns pain into a remunerated form of aesthetic pleasure. However, Agre also points out that it is often objected that these machines are not really reasoning or planning or learning, but these objections can also miss the point. In the same sense that Agre questions the idea of really reasoning or planning, we could ask the same questions: are these machines really making music? Again, if you've looked at the preparatory materials, then you've already encountered Douglas Hofstadter's claim that, he said this in 1979, that there is no way a music program will write anything beautiful. Yet by 1997, he had heard an AI program called Emmy and said, Emmy doesn't generate style on its own. It depends on mimicking prior composers. But that is still not all that much comfort. To what extent is music composed of riffs, as jazz people say? If that's mostly the case, then it would mean that, to my absolute devastation, music is much less than I ever thought it was. Now, whilst Hofstadter has a range of objections and also disappointments once he encounters an AI that is capable of writing to a similar or better standard than Bach, Hofstadter also recognizes that despite all of his objections, that what is coming out from the machine still sounds like music. And this is perhaps the issue that we have now, is that there is sufficient AI music out there, poor and excellent, that actually sounds like music. So the question that Agre addresses is that where someone might counter that actually AI isn't really making music or really planning or reasoning or learning, they still miss the point. And that is the point that Hofstadter understood. It sounds like music. So I'm going to leave you with one last thing from David Cope. So David Cope was asked a question about creativity, and he responded in this way. Creativity is simple. Consciousness, intelligence, those are hard. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to seeing you all in the seminar and continuing these discussions about AI.